Life sometimes tests you when you least expect it. In a moment when you think nothing has changed and everything continues in the same routine, something happens and everything turns upside down. It took me a long time to understand this. I, Rob Lawrence, believed everything was going well until the day I completely lost control of my life. My home, my job, my wife Susan, and my two sons, David and Eli. They were all an illusion, and I didn't realize I was living in this illusion until the moment I discovered the betrayal. Before diving into my story, if you don't want your life to be turned upside down like mine, subscribe to my channel to learn real lessons from the real stories we share every day, just like mine. Also, share your thoughts about the shocking truths I've experienced in the comments, and please show your support by liking my video. Now that you've subscribed, let's dive into my story. Susan and I had been married for almost 20 years. Our relationship was passionate at first. Over the years, while I worked in the security business and she worked as an editor at a publishing house, we built our careers, our children, and our life together. But recently, I had noticed something strange in Susan's behavior. She was coming home late, spending more time at work, and distancing herself from me more and more each day. Yet, I never suspected she could have been unfaithful. How foolish I was. One evening, when Susan once again said, "I'll be working late," I couldn't suppress my suspicion any longer. At that moment, I was determined to find out the truth. I decided to follow Susan that night. I followed her from a distance as she left work. At a time when I thought she would be heading home, Susan instead went to a restaurant. I waited outside for a while, thinking maybe it was a work dinner, but then I saw him, the man she entered the restaurant with. As I watched them through the window, something broke inside me. Suppressing my anger and disappointment, I continued to follow them. After dinner, Susan got into the man's car. Together, they drove to a hotel. In that moment, everything became clear. Susan was cheating on me. It was so obvious, it was impossible to ignore the scene in front of me. On the way home, I thought about what I would say to Susan. Dozens of scenarios were running through my mind, but I didn't know how I would confront her. When I got home, Susan had already returned. She was acting as if nothing had happened. While storms raged inside me, I tried to stay calm, but I knew I couldn't hold it in any longer. I turned to Susan, took a deep breath, and looking straight into her eyes, I asked, "I need to ask you something. Are you cheating on me, Susan?" When she looked into my eyes, she froze for a moment in shock. Then her face quickly paled, and her hands began to tremble. In that moment, I understood everything. There was no point in denying it anymore. "Rob, it only happened once with Hal. It was a mistake," she said, her voice trembling. Something shattered inside me. "Only once?" she said. "Was it a mistake?" This wasn't a mistake. It was outright betrayal. I gave her my years, my trust, my love, and in return, this is what she gave me? "Hal? The Hal from the office?" I shouted. "You cheated on me with him? How long has this been going on, Rob?" Susan's eyes filled with tears. "It only happened once. It was just a mistake. Please forgive me," she begged, tears streaming down her face. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. My mind was swirling with 1,000 thoughts, my emotions in turmoil. "Once?" I asked, my voice trembling. How? How could you do this?" Susan lowered her head, sobbing. "Rob, I'm really sorry. I love you. It was just a mistake, a moment of weakness." "It only happened once with Hal," she continued, crying, her hands covering her face. Our home, our marriage, the life we had built together had crumbled in an instant. "Susan, this is over," I said coldly. "There's no fixing this." After that night, the house was filled with silence. I didn't speak a single word to Susan. My head was filled with thousands of questions, but I didn't have the courage to ask any of them. The kids sensed something was wrong, but I couldn't explain anything to them. They didn't know the truth yet, and I didn't want to drag them into this pain. Every morning, as I left for work, I passed by Susan without looking at her. She sat in the kitchen quietly, holding her coffee. Every morning, the same scene. For a week, I tried to pull myself together. Going to work, spending time with the kids. It all became a necessity, but in the back of my mind, the affair with Hal played on a loop. I wanted to confront Susan, to hear the truth from her, but I was also terrified that the truth would hurt even more. Hal, that man, the man I trusted, who frequently visited our home, the magnitude of the betrayal grew heavier with each passing day. Finally, I decided it was time to talk to Susan. One evening, after the kids had gone to their rooms, I turned to her while we sat in the living room. "What are you planning to do?" I asked. "This can't go on." Susan avoided my gaze. "Rob, I'm really sorry. Please give me another chance. For the kids, for us." "The kids?" I shouted. "Were you thinking about the kids while you were sleeping with him? Or did you not care about them at all?" In that moment, a deep pain appeared on Susan's face. "Rob, really, it was a mistake. I love you." "Stop saying you love me," I said coldly. "Is this love? I gave you everything for years because I loved you, and this is how you repay me?" Susan didn't say anything else. She just stared at me, tears streaming down her face. The anger inside me hadn't lessened at all. In that moment, I decided I had to confront Hal. One morning, at a time when I knew Susan would be at work, I went to Hal's office. When I knocked on the door, he opened it, surprised to see me. "Rob, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice full of shock and fear. "I'm here to talk about your relationship with Susan," I said calmly. For a moment, Hal didn't know what to say. "Rob, it was a mistake. It only happened once. Neither of us wanted this to happen. Really, it was just a mistake," he stammered. "A mistake?" I said sarcastically. "Your mistake has ruined my life, Hal?" There was no need for more words. I threw a punch, hitting Hal hard. He fell to the ground, looking up at me in shock, but I didn't stop. I was unleashing the anger that had built up inside me. Before leaving, I looked at him one more time. "This isn't over," I said, and walked out. After the incident, I decided to end my marriage with Susan. The divorce process began, but it wasn't easy. Susan kept apologizing, saying we needed to save our marriage. But for me, there was no turning back. The divorce process was painful, but the worst part was that our children had to be involved. Seeing the confusion and sadness in David and Eli's eyes hurt more than anything. Throughout the divorce, Susan continually expressed her regret. "Rob, please, we can fix this. We can get through this together," she would say with tears in her eyes. But every time, I gave the same response. "There's no turning back, Susan. Once trust is broken, it can never be repaired." The divorce papers were signed and we were officially separated. Although Susan had custody of the children, they spent a lot of time with me as well. Every moment with them became the most valuable part of my life. A few months after our divorce, I heard that Susan was trying to return to her old job. Things hadn't gone well for her after the affair with Hal. Both of them had struggled at work, and Susan had eventually been forced to leave her job. Hal, however, had stayed. As time passed, I felt my life slowly returning to normal. My bond with my children grew stronger with each passing day. The time I spent with them gave me a reason to hold on to life again. My marriage with Susan was over, but my role as a father would never end. I was doing my best to give them everything they needed. Over time, Susan and I began working together more harmoniously for the sake of our children. Although the bond between us had been completely severed, our love for our kids kept us connected in some way. About a year later, one evening, David came up to me and hugged me. "Dad, I love you," he said. That simple sentence stirred something inside me. No matter how tough life was, I would continue to stand strong for my kids. The wounds caused by Susan's betrayal started to heal over time, but they were never forgotten. We all paid the price for her infidelity, but in the end, this process taught me to be strong and to stand tall for the sake of my children.